What drives a quiet man to stake everything on revenge is never mere injustice. It is contempt carved into his bones, humiliation that crushes his dignity, and the light that was stolen from him, the light that should have been his all along. People mistake his silence for weakness, never realizing that once the silent blade is drawn, it will cut through every lie and leave the world cleansed. My name is Ethan Hayes. The name sounds quiet, steady, unassuming, but my life has been anything but. At 29, I stood on the rooftop terrace of Cloudsail Advertising, the late October wind sharp with exhaust fumes and the faint, bitter tang of cold coffee from the paper cup in my hand. The metal railing bit into my palm through the thin fabric of my suit jacket, and I leaned forward just enough to watch the streams of cars crawling like ants far below, their taillights blurring into streaks of red and gold in the gathering dusk. A crumpled receipt for a sandwich I'd forgotten to eat peeked out of my pocket, and my throat tasted like burnt espresso and regret. My mind replayed the last 3 years like a broken film, each frame heavier than the last, each memory a small, sharp stone in my chest. Pathetic, isn't it? 29 years old, and I felt like nothing more than a crumpled piece of waste paper tossed aside in a corner, forgotten and worthless. I still remembered the day I'd walked through those glass doors for my first interview, 3 years earlier almost to the day. I was 26, fresh out of my master's program, my leather portfolio tucked under my arm. My shoes shined so bright I could see my reflection in the polished marble lobby floor. The receptionist, a woman with a sharp bob and vanilla perfume, had smiled and handed me a temporary badge, her nails painted a deep, polished red. 12th floor, creative department, she'd said, nodding toward the bank of glass elevators. Mr. Voss is expecting you. I'd ridden up alone, the elevator humming softly, and stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall, straightening my tie over and over. I'd been so sure that talent was enough, that a sharp eye and a head full of ideas would carry me. I'd spent 3 years in graduate school honing my craft, staying up until 2 a.m. perfecting every project, winning student awards, building a portfolio I was proud of. I truly believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just cared enough, I'd make a name for myself. Cloudsail had felt like a dream come true. It was one of the biggest agencies in the city, home to campaigns everyone knew, billboards you couldn't drive down the highway without seeing. I'd walked into that lobby, looked up at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the sleek modern art on the walls, and thought, this is it. This is where I'll become someone's star. I learned fast how wrong I was. The heavy wooden door to Gideon Voss's corner office had smelled like sandalwood and old leather when I stepped inside, with a faint, forbidden undercurrent of cigar smoke. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched behind his desk, offering a panoramic view of the skyline, and the shelves lining the walls were crammed with glossy, hardcover design books, most of them, I would later learn, still in their original shrink wrap, bought for display and nothing more. A vintage film camera sat on a side table, purely decorative, and a hand-thrown clay teapot steamed gently on his desk, next to a string of dark wooden prayer beads coiled neatly beside his mouse. Gideon had leaned back in his black leather chair, steepling his fingers, and looked me over like I was a piece of furniture he was considering buying. He was in his early 40s, with dark hair worn half-long, styled with deliberate mess and narrow, triangular eyes that missed nothing. He didn't stand up to greet me. He just gestured at the chair across from his desk and said, in that slow, smooth, patronizing voice of his, "Ethan, let's see what you've got." I'd handed over my portfolio, my fingers a little clammy, and watched as he flipped through it, spending no more than 3 seconds on each page. When he got to the end, he closed it and pushed it back across the desk, like it was something unpleasant. "Your student work is fine," he'd said, the word dripping with condescension. "Cute, even. But this is commercial advertising, not art school. Clients don't pay for pretty pictures. They pay for results. Can you deliver results, Ethan?" I'd nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, sir. I learn fast. I'm ready to work." He'd smiled, thin and unreadable, and spun the prayer beads around his wrist once. "We'll see. Welcome to the team. Don't let me down." I'd walked out of that office buzzing, even with a vague warning. I'd told myself that harshness was just part of the industry, that great creative directors were tough, that if I proved myself, he'd respect me. I'd settled into my cubicle, small, gray, tucked in the far corner of the open floor plan, far from the windows, and thrown myself into every task, no matter how small. I arrived an hour early every day and left an hour late. I proofread every email 3 times. I took every piece of feedback as a gift. But it didn't take long to see the truth. In an agency like Cloudsail, creativity might get you through the door, but it was never the key to moving forward. The real keys were flattering your superiors, playing the political game, and learning to look the other way when things didn't add up. The people who got promoted weren't the people with the best ideas. They were the people who laughed loudest at Gideon's jokes, who brought him his oat milk latte before he even asked, who nodded along with every bad idea he had and called it genius. And I was terrible at all of it. I'd never been good at small talk, at laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, at nodding along when I knew someone was wrong. I just wanted to make good work. I wanted to make things that mattered. That, it turned out, was a liability. From the very first day, Gideon treated me with open, unmasked contempt. I don't know if it was because I didn't flatter him, or because he saw something in my work that threatened him, or if he just enjoyed picking on the quiet new kid who wouldn't fight back. Every concept I submitted, every deck I put together, he never bothered to read carefully. He'd glance at the first page, flick through the rest with a dismissive flick of his wrist, and say, in that lazy, patronizing tone of his, "Ethan, this won't do. Too shallow. No depth. Or, worse, you studied design, but this looks like the work of a production artist. Where's the soul?" There's no soul here. The first time he said it, I'd gone back to my desk and reworked the entire campaign for 3 straight nights, convinced I'd missed something. I added layers of meaning, refined every visual, wrote 3 alternate taglines. When I brought it back to him, thicker, more polished, my chest tight with hope, he'd set it on the corner of his desk without even opening it. "Leave it," he'd said, already looking at his emails. "I'll get to it when I have time." He never got to it. Back then, I was still that naive kid who thought if he just tried harder, if he just made the work perfect enough, he'd finally earn Gideon's respect. So I revised and revised again, pulling all-nighter after all-nighter, my desk piled high with empty takeout containers and crumpled sketch paper, the blue glow of my monitor the only light in the dark office at 3 a.m. The office was quiet then, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant whir of the server room. Sometimes the night security guard would walk past, his boots soft on the carpet, and nod at me through the glass walls. I'd nod back and keep working. I'd show up at Gideon's office each morning with a thicker stack of sketches and a tighter, more polished strategy, my throat tight with hope. And every time, he wouldn't even glance at them. He'd wave a hand like he was swatting a fly and say, "Fine, leave it there. I'll look at it later." And later never came. Months passed. My ideas sat in a pile on his desk, gathering dust, while other people's work I knew was thinner, less original, work that relied on tired tropes and cheap tricks, moved forward and got produced. I'd walk past the conference rooms and see my coworkers presenting campaigns that felt hollow, that lacked the spark I knew I could bring, and each time a little piece of that bright, hopeful version of myself chipped away. I started staying later and later, not because I had work to do, but because I didn't want to go home to my tiny studio apartment and face the fact that I was wasting away. I learned the unspoken hierarchy fast. At the very top of the creative department food chain was Jude Pierce, Gideon's golden boy and loyal shadow. Jude was my age, maybe a year older, with perfectly styled hair and a permanent, easy smile. He wasn't particularly good at design. His work was generic, safe, full of stock photos and overused slogans, but he was a genius at people. He knew exactly what Gideon wanted to hear before Gideon even said it. He'd hover by Gideon's desk, refilling his teapot, laughing at every joke, agreeing with every opinion. He brought Gideon breakfast on Mondays, picked up his dry cleaning on Fridays, and never, ever disagreed with him in public. In return, Gideon gave him all the best projects, all the credit, all the spotlight. I watched it happen day after day. I watched Jude present half-baked ideas that Gideon would call brilliant. I watched Gideon tear my work to shreds in front of the whole team, then turn around and praise Jude for a weaker version of the exact same concept. Once, for a local coffee shop campaign, I spent a week developing a community-focused concept built around neighborhood stories and hand-drawn illustrations. Gideon had shot it down in 10 seconds. Too soft, he'd said. Clients want sales, not poetry. Go back and make it punchier. A week later, Jude presented a campaign built around loud, garish, 50% off banners and generic stock photos of people laughing with lattes. Gideon had loved it. Now that's commercial thinking, he'd said, clapping Jude on the back. See, Ethan? This is what I'm talking about. Learn from him. The room had gone quiet. Everyone had glanced at me, then looked away. I'd stared at my notebook, my face burning, and said nothing. Jude had caught my eye afterward and given me a smug, pitying little smile, like he felt sorry for me for being so stupid as to actually care about the work. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that one day, I'd get my shot, and I'd prove them all wrong. Then came the big one. It was announced at the all-department meeting on a rainy Tuesday morning. Viridian Retail, one of the biggest national brands in the country, was holding a pitch for their full annual brand refresh. The budget was massive, 8 figures, easily, and winning it meant industry recognition that could make a career. The whole room had buzzed when Gideon said it. This was the kind of account that got people promoted. That got people on the cover of industry magazines. I felt a jolt of pure, electric excitement shoot through me. This was it. This was my chance. I threw myself into it completely. For 3 months, I lived and breathed that project. I spent every weekend walking through Viridian stores across the city, wandering the aisles, watching customers, talking to cashiers and floor managers when they had a minute. I filled 3 whole notebooks with observations, what people touched, what they walked past, what made them smile, what made them sigh. I studied 10 years of Viridian's past campaigns, analyzed every competitor's brand identity, dug through sales reports and consumer surveys until my eyes burned. I built an entirely new brand identity from the ground up: visual system, copy voice, full media strategy, in-store experience, every piece woven together into a single, cohesive vision. It was modern, warm, human, nothing like the cold, corporate look they'd had before. I pulled dozens of all-nighters, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with hundreds of hand-drawn concepts, refining every line until my fingers ached and my eyes burned, until the shapes were burned into the back of my eyelids. There was one night, around 2 a.m., when I'd been staring at the same logo mark for hours, frustrated, that I'd grabbed my jacket and walked down to the 24-hour convenience store on the corner for coffee. The air was cold and sharp, rain misting down, and as I stood there on the sidewalk, sipping bitter coffee and watching a taxi splash through a puddle, the idea had hit me clean, simple, perfect. I'd fumbled for my phone, almost dropping it in my hurry, and scribbled the concept down in the Notes app, my fingers numb from the cold. I'd run all the way back to the office, giddy, like I'd found a secret no one else knew about. That was the best feeling in the world, that spark of pure creation. I'd thought, right then, that all the sleepless nights, all the humiliation, all the garbage I put up with, all of it would be worth it for this. On the day of the internal pitch, I put on a new suit, the first nice suit I'd bought since graduation. I combed my hair neatly, printed and bound 12 copies of the deck on thick, matte paper, and walked into that conference room feeling like I finally had a shot. The room was cold, the air conditioning blowing too hard, and my hands were a little clammy, but I didn't stumble once. For 40 minutes, I walked Gideon and the other department heads through every detail: brand strategy, visual system, rollout timeline, ROI projections, explaining the thinking behind every choice, watching for that flicker of approval. I could see it, for a second, on a couple of the other directors' faces: interest, surprise, impressed recognition. Then Gideon cut me off. He slowly turned the prayer beads around his wrist, a faint, knowing smile playing at his lips. It wasn't a smile of praise. It was a smile of condescension, the kind of smile a teacher gives a child who's just said something silly. "Ethan," he said, his voice still slow, still smooth. "The idea isn't terrible." But his tone sharpened, sudden and cold. "This is all so idealistic. It's not practical. It doesn't work in the real world. And visually? It's all so dated. It's 2020-something and you're still recycling tropes from 10 years ago." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My system pulled from the most forward-thinking design language of the moment, with multiple original visual motifs I developed entirely from scratch. I'd tested them with informal focus groups. I'd researched every competing brand to make sure nothing like it existed. How dare he dismiss it out of hand, with nothing but a lazy, baseless insult? I opened my mouth to push back, to ask him to point to exactly what he thought was dated, to explain the reasoning behind his critique, but he didn't give me the chance. He waved a hand again, already looking past me to the next person on the agenda. "Go learn from the senior team first. Stop trying to skip steps. Creativity isn't about flashy tricks." I walked out of that room numb, my shoulders heavy, my throat tight. The 92-page deck felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my arms. I went back to my desk and stared at my screen for an hour without seeing anything. The woman at the desk next to mine gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't say anything. Nobody ever did. Nobody wanted to get on Gideon's bad side. I told myself I'd try again. I told myself I'd refine it, make it more practical, make it impossible to reject. I had no idea the rejection had been the point all along. But the worst was still to come. A month later, the company announced we'd won the Viridian account. The whole office celebrated. There was cake in the break room, a company-wide email with confetti graphics, endless congratulations for Gideon on his brilliant, game-changing pitch. People were already talking about partner track, about industry awards. I was confused at first. I hadn't been told my concept was moving forward. I hadn't been asked to refine anything. Then someone forwarded me the internal case study deck, the one that had been shared with the CEO and the board. I clicked on the attachment, and my breath caught in my throat. There it was. My concept, my visual system, my core strategy, almost word for word. The color palette, the logo system, the 3-part media rollout, even the tagline I'd written at 2 a.m. in that burst of rain-soaked inspiration. The tiny, accidental imperfection in the secondary logo mark, the one I'd never gotten around to fixing in my original sketch, it was there, too, reproduced exactly. Only the name on the cover wasn't mine. It was Gideon Voss. He'd changed a handful of trivial details, swapped out a few accent colors, rewritten the opening copy with a handful of fancy buzzwords, and presented my 3 months of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights as his own magnum opus. He'd even added a little forward about his creative vision and his unique consumer insight, as if any of it had come from him. I felt my heartbeat roar in my ears, loud enough to drown out the office chatter. My vision went fuzzy at the edges, and I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. The chair scraped loudly against the floor when I stood up, drawing stares from nearby desks, but I didn't care. I marched straight to Gideon's office, the deck clutched in my hand like a weapon, and pushed the door open without knocking. Gideon looked up from his desk, annoyed, then schooled his face into a look of bland innocence. "Ethan? What is it?" "I'm busy." I dropped the deck on his desk, my hands shaking. "This is my work. Every bit of it. My strategy, my designs, my tagline. You stole it." He didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and sighed like I was wasting his time, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over a toy. "Ethan, you're overthinking this. This was a team effort. All of our work builds on each other. We take input from everyone, refine it, shape it into something client-ready. That's how the process works. Team effort." I repeated, disbelieving. I didn't see any team when I was here until 4 a.m. every night for 3 months. I didn't see you at all when I was walking around Viridian stores on weekends. You didn't add one single idea. You just put your name on it. His smile hardened. His eyes went cold. "Watch your tone, Ethan. This kind of attitude is very unprofessional. Accusing your supervisor of theft? That's a serious thing. You're under a lot of pressure, I understand. This industry is hard. But you need to learn to be a team player. Maybe you should take a few personal days. Clear your head. He said it so calmly, so reasonably, like he was concerned for my well-being. Like I was the one in the wrong. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, I almost believed it for a second. Almost. I stared at him, at the perfectly tailored suit, the expensive watch, the prayer beads wrapped around his wrist, and I felt something curdle in my chest. This man had never worked a late night in his life for any of the work he took credit for. He just sat in his fancy office and took what he wanted from the people below him, and everyone let him, because he was good at the game. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of his office, back to my desk, and sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, and let the cold, heavy anger settle into my bones. That was when the contempt turned to open cruelty. After that day, Gideon made it his personal mission to break me. He wanted me to know my place. He wanted me to quit. He started dumping every meaningless, degrading errand on me, picking up clients dry cleaning in the pouring rain, hauling heavy metal trusses and speaker equipment to event venues in the sweltering July heat, even stopping by his house on my way home to walk his giant golden retriever, a slobbery beast that pulled so hard on the leash it almost knocked me over. Once, he made me drive across town to pick up a specific brand of artisanal chocolate his wife liked, because he'd forgotten their anniversary and needed a last-minute gift. I'd sat in traffic for an hour and a half, watching the clock tick past the end of the workday, knowing the design revision I was supposed to finish for a client would be late, and I'd be the one who got yelled at for it. The real projects, the work that mattered, went to Jude and the rest of his little circle of yes-men, the ones who laughed at all his jokes and brought him oat milk lattes before he even asked. I went from being a creative to being the department errand boy, and everyone knew it. The interns felt bad for me. The other designers avoided eye contact. Once I was in the middle of a last-minute design revision with a deadline in 2 hours, my fingers flying across my tablet, the client blowing up my Slack with urgent changes, when Gideon called me into his office and tossed a crumpled piece of paper on his desk. It was a child's crayon drawing, bright and messy, dinosaurs and rainbows scribbled across the page. "Run to the print shop on 5th, he said, not even looking up from his phone. Make 10 color copies of my son's art project. He needs them for class tomorrow. Matte cardstock. And get a frame for the best one. Silver." I stared at him, stunned, for a full 10 seconds. A child's art assignment. He wanted a senior creative to drop actual client work for a child's crayon drawing. Just because he could. "Gideon, the Westlake client needs this revision in 2 hours, I said, careful to keep my voice even. "I'm already cutting it close." He looked up then, his eyes sharp and angry, like he couldn't believe I dared to question him. "Are you telling me no? The client will wait. My son's project is more important. You do what I tell you when I tell you to do it. Or do I need to have a talk with HR about your attitude?" It wasn't the task itself. It was the message. I'm in charge. You do what I say. You are nothing. I picked up the drawing and left. I didn't say a word, but my hands were clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms, leaving little half-moon marks. I ran the errand, and the client yelled at me for missing the deadline, and Gideon never said a word about it. He didn't even thank me. He just took the framed drawing and nodded, like I was the office supply cabinet. Worse than the errands was the humiliation in front of the whole team. He loved to hold me up as an example of what not to be, comparing me to Jude in front of everyone during weekly meetings. "Look at Jude," he'd say, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "He knows how to work with people. Clients love him. You just sit there and draw all day. What's the point of being good at the work if nobody wants to work with you?" The room would go quiet. Everyone would glance at me, then look away. I'd stare at my notebook, my face burning, and say nothing. The night I found out he'd stolen the Viridian pitch, I locked myself in my tiny studio apartment and stared at the walls covered in my sketches, my chest aching like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. The rain was tapping against the window, the room lit only by a single desk lamp. Empty takeout boxes littered the floor. I looked in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself, pale, exhausted, dark circles under my eyes. That spark I'd walked in with completely gone. When had I become this person? This weak, spineless thing that just took it, day after day? That apologized for existing? I thought about quitting. I thought about leaving advertising entirely, moving somewhere else, getting a boring desk job where no one would bother me. I thought about going back to my hometown, working at the small design shop my old teacher ran, living a small, quiet life where no one would ever yell at me or steal from me again. But then I thought about Gideon, sitting in his fancy corner office, taking credit for work he didn't do, walking all over anyone who got in his way. I thought about how smug he'd look if I just ran away. How he'd win. How he'd do it to the next quiet kid who walked through the door, and the one after that, and no one would ever stop him. And in that moment, a thought bloomed in my chest, cold and sharp and unshakable. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight back. I was going to make every single one of them pay for looking down on me, for walking all over me, for stealing what was mine. I wasn't a doormat. My silence wasn't weakness. It was just waiting. It was storing up strength. That night, I picked up the ceramic mug I'd used every day for 3 years, the one with a faded geometric design I'd drawn myself for a college project, and I hurled it as hard as I could against the wall. The sound of it shattering was sharp and clean, echoing in the silent room over the sound of the rain. Shards flew everywhere. One piece sliced across my fingertip, and bright red blood welled up instantly, dripping onto the scuffed wooden floor. I didn't feel the pain. My heart hurt worse. I sank down onto the floor and stared at the broken pieces scattered across the linoleum, and they looked like my dream, like my dignity, shattered into 100 tiny shards that could never be put back together the same way. I sat there for a long time, watching the blood bead on my finger and drip onto the floor, the cold seeping through my jeans from the floorboards. I thought about high school, saving up for months to buy my first drawing tablet, staying up until midnight teaching myself Photoshop on a beat-up old laptop. I thought about college, staying in the lab on weekends while everyone else was at parties, because I loved it so much. I thought about all the times my mom told me I was going to do great things, all the times I believed her. For a long time, I just felt sad. Hollow. Like everything I'd ever worked for was meaningless. Then the sadness hardened into something else. Something cold. Something steady. Why should I be the one who leaves? Why should I be the one who gives up? He was the one who stole. He was the one who cheated. He was the one who was wrong. Why should I run? I stood up, slow and steady, and went to the bathroom to wash my hand. I put a bandage on the cut, then grabbed a broom and started sweeping up the broken ceramic, piece by piece. I was careful not to cut myself again. I moved slowly, methodically, and as I swept, I thought. I couldn't fight him head-on. He had too much power, too many allies. If I went to HR, they'd side with him. If I yelled and screamed, I'd be the one who looked unprofessional, the one who got fired. He'd win. No. If I was going to take him down, I had to be smart. I had to be patient. I had to let him think he'd won, let him get comfortable, let him get careless. And then, when he least expected it, I'd hit him with everything I had. I'd play the part of the defeated, obedient errand boy. I'd smile and nod and do every stupid thing he told me to do. I'd lull him into a false sense of security. And all the while, I'd collect evidence. Every last scrap. I'd build a case so solid, so undeniable, that when it all came out, there'd be no way for him to talk his way out of it. I'd ruin him. Completely. When the last shard was swept up and thrown in the trash, I sat down at my laptop and created a new, encrypted folder. I named it Chronicle. Inside, I made a document, dated it, and typed the first line. Goal: hold Gideon Voss accountable for theft, fraud, and abuse of power. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the words on the screen. Outside, the rain had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. From that night on, Ethan Hayes the pushover was dead. The new Ethan? He was going to take back everything that had been stolen from him. He was going to get even. From that night forward, I felt like a different person on the inside. Outwardly, I played the part perfectly, still the quiet, obedient Ethan, nodding at everything Gideon said, jumping when he snapped his fingers, even smiling that eager, pleasing smile when he gave me another ridiculous errand. I was more helpful, more compliant than I'd ever been. I asked questions, I thanked him for his feedback, I acted like every little task he gave me was a great honor. I brought him coffee in the morning, exactly how he liked it, before he even asked. I laughed at his terrible jokes. I agreed with every stupid opinion he spouted in meetings. Slowly, the wariness in his eyes faded. He started to believe I'd been broken, that I'd accepted my place at the bottom of the pile. He stopped watching me like he expected me to snap. He got careless. That was exactly what I wanted. But inside, I was sharpening a blade. I didn't rush in blindly. I knew better than that. Going head-to-head with Gideon directly would be suicide. He'd built his power base at CloudSale over 10 years, had allies in every department, including the head of client services who had his back no matter what. If I wanted to take him down, I couldn't just knock him down a peg. I had to destroy the foundation he stood on. I had to ruin him completely, so he could never do this to anyone else ever again. So I watched. I watched Gideon, and I watched Jude Pierce at his side. Gideon's greatest weakness was his vanity. He craved respect, craved admiration, loved to play the genius creative guru. At every company dinner, every industry event, he'd hold court and tell stories about his legendary campaigns, how he'd won over a stubborn CEO with a single line, how he'd saved a dying brand with one perfect image. His eyes would light up when he talked, greedy and proud, soaking up every bit of attention like a sponge. He loved the sound of his own voice. He loved being the smartest man in the room. Jude was his loyal little shadow. Mediocre at best when it came to actual ideas, but he had a silver tongue and a sixth sense for what people wanted to hear. He told Gideon exactly what he wanted to hear, all day, every day. I'd see him tending to Gideon's fancy clay teapot, pouring tea just the way he liked it, hovering like a personal servant, laughing at every joke like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. It was equal parts pathetic and repulsive. But he was sharp in his own way. Sharp enough to know which side his bread was buttered on. I started quietly gathering pieces of the puzzle. That award-winning brand refresh, officially Gideon's masterpiece, was built almost entirely on my original work. The core ideas, the visual symbols, the media strategy, all of it lined up almost perfectly with what I'd pitched. They'd just put a new coat of paint on it, a new deck template, and called it original. Every evening after everyone left, I'd stay late. Being the errand boy had its advantages. I had access to file rooms, project archives, old email threads that most people never saw. The office would be dark, only the emergency exit signs glowing green, the hallways quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. I'd move slowly, carefully, my phone on silent, my shoes soft on the carpet. A few times, the night security guard walked past, and I'd duck into a supply closet, my heart hammering in my chest, until his footsteps faded. The first time I snuck into the records room, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely type the keypad code. I'd memorized it a week earlier when I'd helped the admin assistant carry a stack of old files down there. The room was cold and dusty, rows of metal shelves stretching back into the darkness, filled with cardboard archive boxes. The air smelled like old paper and mildew. I turned on my phone flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the dark, and started looking for the Viridian Project files. It took me 20 minutes to find the right box, tucked away on a high shelf in the back. I dragged it down, dust flying everywhere, and knelt on the floor to go through it. My breath came fast, shallow, every little sound making me jump. I flipped through page after page, contracts, meeting notes, old drafts of the pitch deck. And there it was, the timeline. The first draft Gideon had submitted to the client was dated 3 days after my internal pitch. The earliest files on the shared drive under his name were created the week after I'd handed him my bound deck. I photographed every page, my hands trembling a little with the rush of it. This was proof. Solid, dated proof. I was just putting the files back when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy boots. Security. My blood ran cold. I froze, listening. The footsteps were getting closer. I scrambled to shove the box back on the shelf, knocking a few folders off in my hurry, and ducked behind the end of the shelf, pressing myself flat against the cold metal. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. The door creaked open. A flashlight beam swept across the room. "Hello," the guard called out. His voice was deep, echoing in the small room. "Anyone in here?" The beam swept closer. I held my breath, my lungs burning. I could see the light moving along the floor, getting nearer and nearer. He stopped just a few feet from my hiding spot. I could see the toe of his boot in the beam of light. "Probably just left the light on," he muttered to himself. The beam swept away. A second later, I heard the click of the light switch, and the room went dark. The door creaked shut. His footsteps faded down the hall. I stayed there, hidden behind the shelf, for another 5 minutes, until I was absolutely sure he was gone. When I finally stepped out, my shirt was soaked through with sweat, and my legs were so wobbly I almost fell over. I leaned against the shelf for a minute, breathing hard, and smiled. A shaky, adrenaline-fueled smile. I had proof. And this was just the beginning. I'd go through the records, one by one, photographing every document, every meeting note, every version of the pitch deck that predated Gideon's final version. I built a timeline, piece by piece, that proved exactly when he'd taken my work and passed it off as his. I dated every sketch, every draft, every email. I left nothing to chance. And I found more. Much more. I started noticing patterns in the vendor contracts Gideon approved. The photography studios, the print houses, the production companies he chose always charged far above market rate, 20–30% higher than other reputable vendors with better portfolios. And every single one of them, I discovered, had ties back to Gideon's wife, Clara. Her name popped up again and again. Studio ownership, consulting roles, shell companies that existed only on paper, registered to her maiden name at addresses that matched properties they owned. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. He was steering work to vendors who kicked money back to him, under the table, through his wife's businesses. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. Maybe millions. I wrote every single anomaly down in a locked notebook on my personal laptop. I cross-referenced business registries, invoice numbers, payment dates. I dug through old expense reports, compared bids from different vendors, mapped out the connections. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was weaving a net. A net Gideon would never see coming until it was too tight to escape. That was when I met Lucian Ward. Lucian was the associate director of marketing, a few years older than me, always dressed in sharp, understated dark suits, wire-rimmed glasses, quiet and sharp. He didn't talk much around the office, but he noticed everything. You could feel it, his eyes taking in every detail, every interaction, every little power play. He'd been at the company longer than Gideon, and everyone knew he was good. Too good, probably. Which was why Gideon hated him. I'd seen them clash in meetings more than once. Gideon would dismiss Lucian's marketing strategies out of hand, even when the data backed them up. He'd poach Lucian's best team members, take credit for ideas that had come out of the marketing department, badmouth him to the CEO behind his back. Everyone knew there was bad blood between them. But Lucian never lost his cool. He was calm, precise, unflappable. Like a chess player always 3 moves ahead. One night very late, I was in the break room heating up instant noodles when he walked in, holding a black ceramic mug. Most people would have just nodded and left or ignored me entirely. But he stopped, leaned against the counter, and said, "Still here this late?" The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Steam from my noodles curled up and fogged my glasses. I gave a bitter little laugh and wiped them on my sleeve. Got used to it. The kind of work I do doesn't get done during office hours. He looked at me for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes, recognition, understanding, like he saw right through the tired smile and knew exactly what was going on. He didn't look surprised. "I saw your pitch deck, you know," he said quietly. "The Viridian one. Before it was revised." I caught a glimpse of it in a cross-departmental folder. My breath caught. I stared at him, suddenly wary. I'd been so careful. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. It was good, he said. Really good. Original. Thoughtful. A shame what happened to it. Something cracked open in my chest then, something that had been frozen solid for months. For the first time, someone had said it out loud. Someone had seen me. Someone knew it wasn't fair. I hesitated, stirring my noodles with a plastic fork, then told him, carefully, without naming names, about what had happened, about ideas I'd poured my life into that had ended up credited to someone else, that were now being held up as the agency's best work. About how it felt to watch someone else get praised for your blood and sweat. Lucian was quiet for a while after I finished. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze distant, like he was thinking about his own ghosts. Most things in this industry aren't black and white, he said finally. You'll run into unfairness everywhere. But the kind of people who build their success on other people's backs? Sooner or later, it all falls apart. Always. They get greedy. They get careless. And eventually, someone pulls the thread. Something clicked in my head. Lucian didn't say he'd help. But he also didn't look surprised. And as I started paying attention in the weeks that followed, I realized Gideon hated Lucian almost as much as he enjoyed bullying me. Lucian was good at his job. Clients loved him. His reputation was growing, and it was a direct threat to Gideon's position and his plan to make partner. I also heard the story from an old-timer in accounts payable about a big campaign a few years back. Lucian had built the entire strategy from scratch, landed the client single-handedly, and Gideon had taken all the credit at the executive review. Lucian hadn't said a word about it publicly, but everyone knew. Lucian had every reason to want Gideon gone too. He wasn't just a sympathetic coworker. He could be an ally. A powerful one. But I didn't trust easily. Not anymore. So I watched. I waited. I tested the waters slowly. We'd run into each other in the break room more often, usually late at night. We'd talk about nothing at first, bad coffee, the terrible office AC, the latest dumb industry trend. Then we'd talk about work, about clients, about the state of advertising. And every time, I was careful. I never said anything too direct, never showed my hand. But he always knew. He'd say things, little things, that told me he saw exactly what Gideon was doing. That he hated it too. Another late night, almost 2 weeks later, I was walking out of the building when I saw Lucian heading for the doors too. We stopped at the entrance, the cool night air wrapping around us, the streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. A taxi drove by, splashing through a puddle from the earlier rain. Long day, he said. Longer than most, I said. Just wrapping some things up. You. He sighed, glancing up at the lit windows of the office building, and there was a flicker of cold anger in his eyes, gone so fast I almost missed it. Same. Some things are easier to handle after everyone's gone home. I knew exactly what he meant. The rot. The things nobody talked about in the light of day. I hesitated for only a second more. Then I told him everything. All of it, the stolen pitch, the vendor kickbacks, the shell companies tied to his wife, every single thing I'd found. I laid it all out there, raw and unfiltered, standing there on the sidewalk in the dark. I told him about the records room, about hiding from security, about the encrypted folder on my laptop. I told him about the mug and the cut on my finger, and the night I decided I wasn't going to take it anymore. Lucian listened without interrupting, his face impassive, only the occasional furrow of his brow showing he was surprised. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, cars passing by on the street behind us. If all of this is true, he said finally, it's enough to ruin him. Completely. But you understand, once we start this, there's no going back. He won't go quietly. He'll fight dirty. He'll try to destroy you first. He has friends. He has connections. This won't be easy. I looked him straight in the eye. I've thought about this every single night for months. He took my work. He took my dignity. I'm not walking away. Not now. Not ever. A faint, approving smile tugged at Lucian's mouth. Good. Then I'm in. From that night on, we worked together in secret. Lucian used his resources in the marketing department to dig deeper into the vendor deals, to trace the money flows, to confirm the connections between Gideon's wife and every overpriced supplier. He had access to financial reports and client budgets I could never have gotten my hands on. He pulled payment records, invoice histories, internal bid comparisons. The pattern was undeniable. Every single vendor Gideon selected was 20 to 35% more expensive than competing bids, and every single one had a direct financial link to Claravas. I kept building the plagiarism case, kept documenting every detail, and together we started planning the reveal. We'd meet after work at the 24-hour convenience store down the street, grabbing coffee or energy drinks, leaning against the glass refrigerators like we were just chatting casually, while we traded notes and mapped out every step. The cashier behind the counter never paid us any mind. We'd stay there for an hour sometimes, talking in low voices, glancing out the window every now and then to make sure no one from the office walked by. We never talked about it at work. Never emailed about it. Never texted about anything sensitive. We were careful. Paranoid, almost. But that was how you won. At first, Lucian argued for a quieter approach. Send it all to the board anonymously. Send it to the industry association. Let them handle it. That way you're protected. He never has to know it was you. I shook my head. No, that's not enough. He'll lawyer up. He'll spin it. He has friends on the board. They'll bury it. He'll get a golden parachute and go work at another agency and do the exact same thing all over again. He needs to be humiliated. Publicly. He needs everyone in this industry to know exactly what he is. He needs to never work in this town again. Lucian looked at me for a long time, then nodded. All right. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We do it where everyone can see. We didn't want to just get him fired. We wanted him to fall from the highest possible point, in front of everyone who mattered. We wanted the whole industry to see exactly what he was. No quiet termination, no hush money, no golden parachute. A public fall. I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I might actually win. With Lucian on board, everything moved faster and more deliberately. He pointed out something I should have seen sooner. Gideon's entire world revolved around the Golden Sale Creative Award. It was the most prestigious prize in the industry, the one every creative director chased. Winning it meant status, respect, and almost certainly a promotion to partner at the agency. Gideon had been chasing it for years, and the stolen Viridian brand refresh was his ticket. He was already telling people he had it in the bag. He'd even booked a reservation at the most expensive restaurant in town for an after-party. Let him win, Lucian said, stirring his coffee, his eyes sharp. Let him stand up there on that stage, in front of every agency, every reporter, every client, at the very peak of his ego. Let him give his big speech about creativity and integrity. Then we pull the rug out from under him. It'll hurt more than any termination letter ever could. He'll never live it down. His reputation will be ashes. I agreed immediately. It was perfect. Cruel, elegant, perfect. We doubled our efforts. With Lucian's access, we got full copies of the actual vendor contracts. On the surface, they looked legitimate, but Lucian pointed out the fine print. Each one included a vague, creative consulting fee, tens of thousands of dollars, with no deliverables listed, no scope of work, nothing. And every single one of those fees was wired directly to a design studio owned solely by Gideon's wife, a studio with no website, no portfolio, no public presence at all. It was a shell. Nothing more. Meanwhile, I went through every page of my original pitch, every sketchbook, every early draft saved on my personal hard drive, and lined them up side by side with Gideon's final version. The matches were undeniable. Core design elements, color palettes, campaign taglines, even the structure of the media plan, all identical. Most damning of all, that tiny, accidental flaw in one of my hand-drawn sketches, that slight uneven line on a secondary logo mark I'd never bothered to fix, was reproduced exactly in Gideon's polished final version. He'd copied it so carelessly he hadn't even noticed the mistake. I compiled it all into a detailed side-by-side report, annotated, sourced, irrefutable. It was proof. Cold, hard proof. My whole mindset shifted. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a hunter, patient and focused, watching my prey walk closer and closer to the trap. I didn't hate Gideon anymore, not exactly. I just felt cold, focused, like a scientist running an experiment. The awards ceremony was scheduled for the annual industry gala at the downtown Grand Region Hotel. Every major player in advertising would be there, cameras, reporters, everything. It was the most public stage possible. Exactly what we wanted. A week before the gala, Lucian found me with something even bigger. He texted me one night, just after 9, asterisk at the store. Need to talk, asterisk. I rushed over. He was standing by the coffee machine, his face serious, holding his phone in his hand. I got something, he said, his voice low, when I got close. He didn't just steal the work. He tried to buy the award. I stared at him. One of the judges, Lucian said. Gideon reached out to him privately. Promised him a payment if he made sure Cloudsale won. I have screenshots of the messages. They talk about an arrangement fee, about securing the result. All of it. $20,000. I felt a rush of cold heat run through me. This wasn't just plagiarism and embezzlement anymore. This was outright fraud. This would destroy him forever. He'd never work in this city again. He'd be lucky if he didn't face criminal charges. How did you get these? I said. Lucian just smiled faintly. I have my sources. You just need to know they're real. And they're damning. We decided then and there, the gala. That was where it would all end. We'd drop everything, all at once, right when Gideon was holding that trophy in his hand, right when he was at his most triumphant. I barely slept the night before. I copied every piece of evidence, the plagiarism report, the contract details, the bank transfer records, the judge's messages onto an encrypted USB drive, double-checking every file. I made 3 backup copies, just in case, and hid them in different pockets of my suit jacket. I wrote a full, detailed account of everything, laid out clearly for anyone to follow, no gaps, no leaps. I rehearsed what I'd say over and over in the mirror. Short, sharp, clear. No yelling, no histrionics, just the facts. I stood in front of my mirror that morning, straightening my tie. The man looking back at me wasn't the tired, defeated kid from a few months ago. His eyes were sharp, steady, sure of himself. The old Ethan was gone. This one was going to walk out of that gala with his life back. The gala started in the early evening. The grand ballroom was packed, crystal chandeliers blazing, waiters circulating with champagne flutes, everyone in their best suits and dresses. Agency heads, creative directors, reporters, clients, everyone who was anyone in advertising was there. The air smelled like perfume and champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. The low hum of conversation filled the room, laughter and business talk mixing together. Gideon and Jude sat at a front table, preening like peacocks. Gideon was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit, an expensive designer lapel pin on his lapel, smiling and shaking hands with everyone who walked by, already acting like he'd won. Jude hung at his elbow, laughing too loud, agreeing with everything he said, schmoozing with anyone who mattered. I sat in a back corner, the main USB drive heavy in my breast pocket, my heart beating fast and hard. Not from fear. From anticipation. From the quiet thrill of knowing what was coming. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. Lucian sat a few tables away, and when our eyes met, he gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We'd gone over the timeline a dozen times. Wait for the award. Wait for him to take the stage. Wait for him to start his speech. Then move. The awards ceremony started. The host worked through the categories, the crowd applauding each winner. When they got to the Golden Sale Creative Award, the room went quiet. Everyone knew this was the big one. The host paused for dramatic effect, smiled, and spoke into the microphone. And this year's Golden Sale Creative Award goes to Cloudsale Advertising. Gideon Voss. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, bright and endless. Gideon stood up, smoothed his jacket, and walked up to the stage with that slow, triumphant stride, like he'd known all along he'd win. He shook hands with the presenter, took the trophy, held it up high for the cameras, and beamed. The light caught the crystal, sending rainbows across the room. He stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and opened his mouth to give his acceptance speech. That was my cue. I took a deep breath. I stood up. I walked straight down the aisle toward the stage, my steps steady, my head high. People turned to stare, murmuring, but I didn't look at any of them. I only had eyes for Gideon. Gideon saw me coming. His smile froze on his face. Confusion flickered across his features, then annoyance, then anger. "Ethan," he said, sharp and condescending, into the microphone. The sound boomed through the ballroom. "What is the meaning of this?" "I'm speaking. Leave. Now." I didn't stop. I walked right up to the edge of the stage, lifted the envelope in my hand so everyone could see it, and spoke as clearly and loudly as I could, my voice ringing through the silent ballroom. "Mr. Voss, you may be very creative indeed. But what you create isn't advertising. It's lies. You take other people's work and call it your own. You steal client money and put it in your pocket. And you have so little respect for this industry that you'd cheat to win its highest honor." You could have heard a pin drop. Every head in the room turned toward me. Every eye was on us. The air felt thick, electric, heavy with shock. The flashbulbs started going off immediately, pop, 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 lighting up the room. Gideon's face went from pale to furious to terrified, all in a few seconds. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. All that anger, all that humiliation, all those months of swallowing my pride and biting my tongue, every bit of it rose up in me, sharp and clean and finally free. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. I didn't flinch. Not even for a second. I stood there under hundreds of stares and held my ground. Gideon's face had gone ashen, a fine sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead, dripping down his temples. Jude, standing just off stage, looked like he might pass out, inching backward like he could disappear into the curtain, his face white as a sheet. The industry leaders, the agency CEOs, the judges, all of them stared, stunned, their expressions shifting from confusion to wariness to dawning disbelief. A few people whispered to each other, leaning in. The room hummed with quiet, shocked energy. "Ethan, you are out of your mind." Gideon finally found his voice, sputtering with rage, his tone cracking with panic. "This is slander. Complete fabrication. Security. Get this man out of here immediately." I smiled coldly and held up the USB drive in my hand. "Slander? Then explain this, Mr. Voss. Explain why your award-winning Viridian campaign matches a pitch I submitted to you over a year ago, the same pitch you called shallow and dated and refused to even discuss, with over 90% overlap in core concept, visual identity, and strategic framework." I plugged the drive into the projector port at the side of the stage. Lucian stepped forward calmly to operate the controls, his face impassive, like he did this every day. The giant screen behind the stage lit up, and my side-by-side report filled the screen, my original hand sketches on the left, Gideon's final campaign visuals on the right, every matching element highlighted in bright red. The similarities were impossible to miss. Even the untrained I could see it. The tiny, flawed line on the secondary logo was circled, with timestamps proving my version came first. A murmur rippled through the ballroom, growing louder by the second. The other creatives in the room leaned forward, eyes wide, recognition dawning on their faces. They knew. They could see the craft. They could tell which version was the original sketch and which was the polished copy. You can fake a lot in this industry, but you can't fake the process. You can't fake the rough edges of an original idea. Gideon's legs wobbled. He grabbed the podium to steady himself, his knuckles white, but he still tried to bluster his way through. This is coincidence. All creative work shares common ground. Convergent evolution. This is a malicious, jealous attack from a disgruntled employee. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice ice cold, calm as anything. Coincidence? Is this coincidence too? Lucian switched to the next slide. The screen filled with contract excerpts, bank transfer confirmations, corporate registry records showing the vendor companies and Gideon's wife's studio all linked together, one tangled web of hidden payments. Dates, dollar amounts, company names, all laid out in black and white. "These vendors you work with," I said. The ones you always choose, no matter how high their bids are. What exactly is the creative consulting they provide? Why are hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees wired directly to your wife's personal studio, with no deliverables, no invoices, no record of any actual work being done? Is that also a coincidence, Mr. Voss? The murmur in the room swelled into a roar. People were standing up now, craning to see the screen. The head of the awards foundation sat rigid in his seat, his face thunderous, his mouth pressed into a thin line. A few reporters had already pulled out their phones, typing furiously, filing stories in real time. Gideon couldn't form words. He stammered, his mouth working, but nothing coherent came out. He looked around the room, wild-eyed, like he was looking for an exit, for someone to save him. Nobody moved. Nobody came to his defense. "And there's more," I said, and the room went quiet again, everyone leaning forward, holding their breath. "You didn't just steal the work. You tried to buy the award. Here are messages between you and one of the judges, discussing a $20,000 payment to ensure you won. You called it an arrangement fee. You called it a guaranteed result." Lucian switched slides again. The text messages appeared on the screen, clear as day, time-stamped, sender name visible, every word damning. "Just make sure I walk away with the golden sale. The $20,000 will be in your account the day after the gala. No delays. No paper trail." The sender was Gideon Voss. Dead silence. Complete, total silence. Everyone in the room stared at the screen, then at Gideon, stunned into disbelief. The man who'd been preening like a king 5 minutes ago looked like he might collapse. He sagged against the podium, all the color drained from his face, his eyes wide and wild with terror. The trophy slipped a little in his hand, his fingers going numb. Jude actually dropped to the floor, cowering behind the stage curtain, his hands over his head, like he thought no one could see him. The president of the Golden Sale Foundation stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor with a loud, harsh sound. He marched up onto the stage, his face purple with rage, ripped the trophy right out of Gideon's hands, and slammed it down on the podium so hard the crystal cracked with a sharp, ringing sound. "Gideon Voss," he said, his voice shaking with fury, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Gideon said nothing. He just stared at the floor, his whole body trembling, defeated. The foundation president announced it right then and there. Gideon was stripped of the award, permanently banned from ever entering or participating in any Golden Sale event for life. The Cloud Sale CEO, red-faced and furious, followed immediately. Gideon was terminated, effective immediately, and the company would be launching a full internal investigation into all of his projects. I stood there and watched it all happen, and I felt no triumph, no rush of vengeful joy. Just quiet. A deep, calm stillness, like a storm finally passing. After all those months of planning, of hiding, of swallowing my pride, the truth was out. Everyone knew. "You did good," Lucian said quietly, stepping beside me. There was respect in his eyes, real respect. I smiled back at him. It was the first real, honest smile I'd had in 3 years at that company. Security escorted Gideon out. As he passed me, he looked over his shoulder, and his eyes were full of hatred and despair and utter ruin. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, steady and unflinching, so he could see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. That I'd won. The rest of the gala was a blur. It was all anyone talked about. Gideon Voss's public execution. Reporters swarmed me for a while, asking questions, shoving microphones in my face, but I just told them to wait for the official investigation and walked away. I didn't want to be the story. I just wanted the truth to be known. Lucian and I left together, walking out into the cool night air. The city was still awake, traffic humming by on the street below. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just walked, side by side, the adrenaline slowly draining out of us. We ended up at a dive bar a few blocks away, the kind of place with sticky floors and bad neon beer signs, where no one from the industry would ever go. We sat in a booth in the back and ordered 2 beers. We clinked the bottles together, silent. "To the truth," Lucian said. "To the truth," I repeated. We drank our beer, and we didn't talk about Gideon. We talked about what came next. In the weeks that followed, Cloudsail's internal investigation moved fast. I turned over every piece of evidence I had, every notebook, every file. Lucian testified, sharing everything he'd uncovered from the marketing side, bringing his own records and emails. The forensic accountants went through Gideon's expense reports and vendor contracts with a fine-tooth comb. The findings were damning. Plagiarism, embezzlement, vendor fraud, bribery of a judge, multiple counts of serious misconduct, spanning nearly a decade. The total amount of money he'd siphoned off through fake consulting fees was well into the millions. Jude, who'd helped Gideon cover up the plagiarism and falsify documents, was fired too. He tried to throw Gideon under the bus to save himself, but it didn't work. He was just as guilty. Gideon's reputation as a brilliant creative genius collapsed overnight. It wasn't easy. During the investigation, Gideon tried to fight back. He reached out through contacts to pressure me. He sent threatening anonymous messages. He tried to spread rumors that I'd fabricated everything out of jealousy, that I'd hacked his accounts. Once, I noticed a car following me home from work for 3 nights in a row. He even posted a long, rambling statement on LinkedIn, calling me a disgruntled ex-employee, a liar, a thief. But Lucian had warned me this would happen. We'd prepared. I got a dash cam. I saved every message. I documented every threat. Every single one of them only made his case worse, only added to the list of charges against him. He was digging his own grave, and he didn't even realize it. When the company released its full, 40-page investigative report, with bank records and email chains and sworn statements, his post got deleted, and his LinkedIn profile disappeared. When it was all over, I went back up to that rooftop terrace, the same one I'd stood on months ago, staring down at the city feeling like nothing. This time, the weight was gone. My chest felt light. I breathed in the cool evening air, and for the first time in forever, I felt free. A new chapter of my life was starting. The Gideon Voss scandal shook the whole agency, and it sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Cloudsail did a full internal overhaul, cleaning house, rewriting ethics policies, changing the whole culture. A handful of Gideon's other allies in leadership were let go too. For the first time since I'd started there, the office felt honest. People started speaking up. Ideas got judged on their merit, not on who'd kissed up to whom. The CEO of the company called me into his office personally a few days after the investigation closed. His name was Arthur Hale. He was a quiet man, older, with gray hair and a firm handshake. He thanked me. He said the agency needed people like me, people with talent, with principles, who were willing to stand up and do the right thing even when it was hard. He said I'd done more for the company's integrity in one night than most people did in their whole careers. Then he offered me something I'd never dared to dream of, my own independent creative studio, separate from the rest of the agency, reporting directly to him, no middle managers, no politics. A place where I could build something real, where creativity actually came first. I'd have full control over hiring, over projects, over direction. A blank slate. He said we'd call it Inkthorn Creative. Sharp. Strong. Unapologetic. It fit. I didn't jump up and down with excitement. I just nodded, calm, and accepted. For me, it was never about the title or the promotion. It was about getting to make real work in a place that respected the craft. I went to find Lucian right after. He was in his office, packing up a few things into a briefcase. I want you to come with me, I said, leaning in the doorway. Strategy partner. Inkthorn doesn't work without you. None of this would have happened without you. I don't want to just get revenge. I want to build something good. Something that lasts. Together. Lucian laughed, a quiet, warm sound. He closed his briefcase and looked at me, a faint smile on his face. You're poaching me from my own department? Right after we just cleaned house. He smiled, adjusting his glasses. All right. I'm in. Working with people who actually have integrity? That's the kind of challenge I like. Inkthorn Creative launched a month later. We moved into a bright, open loft space downtown, in an old, converted warehouse. High ceilings, exposed brick, huge floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with golden afternoon sun. We painted the walls white and put in big rolling white bars and a long communal table and a proper espresso machine. We brought in plants, lots of them, to make it feel alive. No cubicles. No corner offices. Everyone worked out in the open together. We started small, just a handful of us, everyone handpicked, every one of us there because we loved the work, not the politics. No baggage, no agendas. Just people with fire in their eyes, ready to make something that mattered. We hired a senior designer who'd left another agency because she was tired of her ideas being stolen. We hired a young copywriter who was brilliant but quiet, the kind of person who'd never get noticed in a big agency politics game. We hired a producer who could work miracles on a tight budget. No yes men. No ladder climbers. Just people who cared about the work. We turned down work, too. We said no to clients who only cared about cheap viral tricks, who didn't respect the creative process, who wanted us to cut corners. We picked brands that shared our values, and we made work that actually connected with people, that had heart. We spent weeks on research, on refining ideas, on making sure every piece meant something. We didn't cut corners to save time. We didn't dumb things down to make them safer. The first few months were hard. We were a new studio and proven. A lot of clients were curious about the story of how we'd started, but they hesitated to trust us with big budgets. We took small jobs, local brands, nonprofits, anything that let us do good work. We worked long hours. We argued about taglines and color palettes until late at night. But it was good. It was honest. Nobody was stealing from anyone. Nobody was playing games. With Lucian's sharp strategy and my creative team's vision, our first major campaign, a short documentary series about loneliness and connection in modern cities, went viral almost overnight. We followed 5 people from different walks of life: a night shift nurse, a freelance coder, a taxi driver, a retired librarian, a recent college grad, talking about what it felt like to be alone even when you were surrounded by people. It was quiet, honest, unflashy. No voiceover, no dramatic music. Just people talking, honestly, about their lives. We funded it ourselves, on a shoestring budget, because no client wanted to touch something so uncommercial. We released it on a Tuesday morning, with no big marketing push, just posted it on our studio's social media accounts. It hit 100 million views in 3 days. Major news outlets picked it up. People wrote essays about it. They shared their own stories in the comments, thousands and thousands of them. Strangers were reaching out to each other. It started conversations. It mattered. And for the first time, my name, Ethan Hayes, was associated with great work, not with being the guy who got pushed around. We became the most talked about new studio in the industry. Clients started coming to us, not the other way around. Good clients. Clients who wanted real work. As for Gideon, he was blacklisted. No reputable agency would touch him. He tried to open his own little studio, but every client he approached knew his name and what he'd done, and they all ran the other way. His wife left him not long after the scandal broke, taking most of their money and their son with her. I heard about it secondhand, 6 months later, at an industry conference out of town. An old acquaintance from another agency told me he'd run into Gideon in a small city a few hours away, working out of a tiny strip mall print shop. He did menus for local diners and flyers for used car dealerships, cheap work, barely scraping by. His hair was gray, he'd put on weight, and he looked away when he saw my acquaintance, like he was ashamed. I thought I'd feel satisfied when I heard that. I thought I'd relish his downfall, that I'd feel that sweet rush of revenge everyone talks about. But when the news reached me, I just felt nothing. No joy. No anger. No satisfaction. Just quiet. Like closing a book I never wanted to read again. Revenge, I realized, was never about making him suffer. It was about clearing away the rot that had been blocking my way. It was about killing the weak, scared version of myself that had let other people define his worth. It taught me how ugly people can be, but it also taught me who I could trust, who would stand beside me when things got hard. That broken mug on my apartment floor? I swept up the pieces a long time ago. I bought a new one, plain white, no design. A fresh start. My life had moved on. Completely. Now, most days, I stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Inkthorn studio, looking out over the city. The afternoon sun slants in, warm and golden, falling across the desks and the whiteboards covered in sketches. I can hear my team laughing in the next room, arguing about a tagline, brainstorming ideas. I think sometimes about what would have happened if I'd never fought back. If I'd just stayed quiet, kept my head down, let them walk all over me. I'd probably still be running errands, still be wasting away, still be letting my talent rot in the shadows. All that pressure, all that pain, all that despair, it pushed me to the edge. But it also woke something up in me, something strong I didn't know I had. I learned to be patient. I learned to be cold and careful and smart. I learned to light my own way in the dark. I don't run from hard things anymore. I don't complain. I just build. I just get better. I take control of my own fate. I glance over at Lucian, standing at the whiteboard, mapping out strategy for our next big project, his profile lit by the soft afternoon sun. Steady. Brilliant. Reliable. He'd been the one to reach out a hand when I was at my lowest. He'd been the one to show me that real strength isn't about watching your enemy fall. It's about building something better, something that lasts, for the people who matter. He feels my eyes on him and looks over, smiling, marker still in his hand. Something on your mind, he says. I shake my head, smiling back. Nothing. Just thinking about what we should do next. Something bigger. Something that matters. He sets down his marker and walks over to stand beside me, both of us looking out at the skyline, the city stretching out below us, endless and bright. Down on the street, people hurry to and from work, each one with their own stories, their own struggles, their own quiet victories. We've got time, he says, quiet and sure. No rush. We'll get there. He's right. We do have time. Outside, the sky is bright blue, the sun is shining, and the whole world stretches out ahead of us, full of possibility. My story started with revenge. But it won't end there. My name is Ethan Hayes. And this is just the beginning.